Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll give everyone just a minute or so to get in the webinar. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Julia, and I am the president of the current president of the Women in Mining Arizona chapter. First, I'd like to say thank you and welcome to today's talk about integrating sustainability in copper mining and refining. Before getting started, we like to give a brief introduction to our organization, Women in Mining, and why we are hosting these talks. Lose our slide. Okay, thanks, Megan. The Women in Mining, the Arizona chapter of Women in Mining is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2019 with 5 key objectives, one of which is to educate our members and the public in the importance of mining in their lives and in society overall, as well as on the technology, economic, regulatory, and other mining related topics. These monthly dig-in webinars are a part of our efforts to meet this commitment. And then we'd like to just give a brief thank you to our overall sponsor, the WIM Arizona Platinum sponsor, Freeport-McMoRan. And then I'm going to turn it over to Megan to introduce our speakers today.
Hi, everyone. I want to introduce our speakers and read their brief biographies. We have Andrea Vaccari, the Director of Responsible Production Frameworks and Sustainability with Freeport-McMoRan. And her bio is that she spent the majority of her 23-year career in the mining and metals industry and sustainability and operational roles. She is currently Director of Responsible Production Frameworks and Sustainability at Freeport-McMoRan Incorporated. In this role, she leads a team that works across the copper value chain with Freeport FCX operations, suppliers, customers, external stakeholders to advance responsible production. This work includes the areas of human rights, assurance, ESG reporting, responsible sourcing, product stewardship, and climate change. She is currently the co-chair of the Copper Mark Advisory Council and the chair of the International Copper Association's Material Stewardship Council. Andrea currently lives in the Phoenix area and enjoys spending time with her husband and 2 young children outdoors. And our other presenter today, Andrea Boltz. Her bio is Andrea Boltz works in corporate sustainability and has over 20 years experience in the mining industry. She joined the Freeport-McMoRan sustainability team in 2017 and focuses on the company's global sustainability programs and risk management and responsible production sustainability assurance. She was raised in a mining family and began her mining career in investor relations and corporate development across North and South America. Andrea also served as a sustainable infrastructure analyst through a joint program with Harvard University's Graduate School of Design and the Inter-American Development Bank, and as senior coordinator in education, diversity, and urban resilience to climate extremes through Arizona State University and the U.S. National Science Foundation. She holds a Master of Arts from Harvard in corporate sustainability and a Bachelor of Arts in geography. As a former Olympic athlete in rowing, Andrea continues to enjoy time outdoors and on the water with her husband, 2 sons, and multiple dogs. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea and Andrea.
Thanks so much, Megan. Let me see if I can do this without breaking the system. There we go. Can you see that okay?
Yes, looks great, Andrea.
Okay, wonderful. So first, just a huge thank you to Megan and Julia and the entire WIM Arizona team. We're so thrilled to have a WIM chapter here in Arizona that is so active, and just really appreciate the opportunity to get together on these lunch and learns. I always find them really informative. Hopefully you find this one informative too. And we really look forward to your questions at the end. So we're here to talk to you today about integrating sustainability into copper mining and refining. Megan already gave us a great introduction. I've been with Freeport for coming up on 3 years, and have spent really a lot of that time working with the operations and the teams across Freeport to really translate all this great work that's been done over the years at Freeport into demonstrated responsible production. Of course, our cautionary statement, I'll just flash that by, just so you realize that, of course, it's everything that we say is not set in stone. Really a bit about Freeport. Most of you probably know more about Freeport than I do, frankly. Because like I said, I've been with the company for 3 years and I'm still learning. But for those of you that are new to Freeport, we are a global copper producer. We are most days the largest publicly traded copper producer globally. We have many assets right here at home in Arizona, as well as a very large copper and gold mine in Indonesia called Grasberg, and 2 significant operations in South America. Here in North America, we have, like I said, many operations, 7 copper mines, 2 molybdenum mines, actually the only 2 primary molybdenum mines in North America. And then we also have processing facilities. And we really, work hard to work closely with our stakeholders locally to really drive home our sustainability strategy and work hard to demonstrate to our stakeholders that we are a responsible producer. And really more on that, our values underpin everything that we do. At Freeport, our vision is really to be foremost in copper. Our values are safety, respect, integrity, commitment, and excellence. And really that underlies everything that we do across the ESG span or responsible production. As we often refer to it, we really work across the 3 traditional pillars, so people, environment, and governance, to drive and integrate our external commitments. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Copper, as I probably don't, again, need to tell most of you this, considering copper's predominance in Arizona, but copper is critical to progress. The energy transition won't happen without it. It's crucial to infrastructure. It's crucial to electric vehicles. It's crucial to the technology that we've grown accustomed to. And it also plays a role in public health. Copper in and of itself has the ability to basically render microbes or basically bacteria and viruses on its surface, basically to kill them, which is something that is a little known fact about copper. But really across all of these 4 areas, copper is crucial. And we really believe that the growth and the demand that is expected to happen in the next 10 to 20 years can't be at a cost to sustainability. So we're working really hard that, so as we grow, as we produce more copper and molybdenum, of course, that we do it in a responsible way. Our strategy really is aligned with international best practices. We were a founding member of the International Council on Mining and Metals, and our CEO, Richard Adkerson, is the current chair of ICMM. Steve Higgins, our Chief Administrative Officer, is currently the chair of the International Copper Association. And as you heard, I try to do a lot of work, and our team does a lot of work in these external organizations, whether it's Copper Mark, the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, or any of the others that you see here. So today we're going to talk to you about the Copper Mark. So how have we gone about this process of really taking all that great work that's been done over the last few decades around sustainability at our mine sites and operations and demonstrate it in a credible way to our stakeholders. And so, our strategy really has been to do that through the Copper Mark. The Copper Mark might be something new to those of you or participating today. It was released in 2020, right at the start of COVID, actually. It was launched as an independent, not-for-profit organization based in London. And really, the whole purpose of it was to create this credible assurance framework. So a third-party assurance framework that would demonstrate to external stakeholders that participants, whether they be copper mines, smelters, or refineries, are living up to the commitments that they make within the Copper Mark. the framework itself, I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, but ultimately it's that requirement for third-party assurance of site performance and then sharing of that, the results of that assurance with the copper mark and then with stakeholders through reports on the website that really, makes it that valuable certification or award. We're committed to achieving it at all of our copper producing sites. You can see the table at the bottom here. We've already received it at 7 of our sites. We have 4 more sites in process. And then we're planning to start the process for our PTFI mine in Papua, Indonesia this year. But I think, importantly, just, being that we're women in mining in Arizona, we've been doing a lot of this work in Arizona. Our Morenci mine and Miami mine and smelter went through the process over the last, I think they were certified last year, and really went through the process the preceding year. And then of course, several of our other sites did as well. One of the things that we really value about the Copper Mark is that its whole intention, the whole theory of change for it, if you will, or the whole purpose for it, is to join together the whole value chain for copper, from mine all the way to the end user. And so what does that mean? That means that ultimately we create this transparency system to where, a vehicle manufacturer, let's say Ford, who is currently a Copper Mark partner, Ford can make claims about its vehicles. So it can say, okay, of the, let's say 80 kilograms of copper that are in this electric vehicle, X amount is produced responsibly, or all of it is produced responsibly. And so ultimately the whole aim of the Copper Mark is to connect together customers, end users, and mines and refineries. Currently, the Copper Mark was launched with a standard in place for the first 2 sort of circles you see there, so mines and smelter refineries. And right now they're actually trialing, doing a pilot for semi-fabrication, which is very exciting. They've got 13 sites signed up to go through that process and really develop and formalize and publish that standard. So really just overall, right now, we're very excited to be a part of it, and really can't wait to see what comes of it in the future. There's a cool little video here. I don't think you'll have the slides, but you can go on YouTube and you can search for the Copper Mark on YouTube. And there's a neat 2-minute video that really describes its purpose. So what's contained in the Copper Mark, I'll talk about this briefly, and then Andrea is going to talk to you about really our whole process and what we learned going through it. The Copper Mark's requirements span ESG. So they cover, there's 32 requirements. They were based on something called the Risk Readiness Assessment, which was developed by the Responsible Minerals Initiative, which is actually a not-for-profit organization here in the United States that was created by electronics and automakers, as well as several other sectors, to really enable more transparency in the supply chain. So really to enable responsible sourcing, if you will, of metals and minerals. And so the risk readiness assessment really covers these 5 areas you see here, which, everybody expresses it a different way, but essentially is ESG. So governance, labor rights, environment, community, and human rights. It is really, I think, important that it is connected and tied to really an existing standard that was developed by the value chain. It's not something new or different. It's really come from the development of already those participants in the value chain. And ultimately, the way that Copper Mark has set up their framework is that you don't necessarily have to implement these requirements as they're written in the Copper Mark guidance. They have an equivalency-based approach. So if you're a mine or a producer, let's say like a smelter or refinery that has other certifications like ISO 14001, ISO 9001, ISO 45001, any of those other traditional certifications that we started, with 20 years ago or so, or if you have something different like let's say towards sustainable mining in Canada or any other standard, the Copper Mark actually has an equivalency matrix that they've set up to say, okay, let's say, for example, for child labor and forced labor, within those other systems, what would be considered equivalent? And that's one of the big things that we all face as producers is how do you pick one of these frameworks and not have to implement them 6 or 7 times, just implement one framework. And so Copper Mark's really designed itself to be an equivalency platform or a standalone platform if that's needed for you in your company. All right, I'm going to hand over to Andrea and just continue moving slides for you, Andrea.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah, okay, great. So we thought we would take a few minutes now to walk you through the Copper Mark Award and Sustainability Assurance process, in which both are closely tied, and assurance being a very key component of the process and based on continual improvement. The first step, as shown on this slide, is for the producer to initiate the Copper Mark application process by signing a letter of commitment, which delineates each site that will be applying for the award. The LOC contains site information like materials produced, types of operations, for example, mining, smelting, refining, etc. Then within 6 months of submitting the LOC to Copper Mark, each applying site needs to complete a self-assessment through which Andrea referred to, the RRA, or the Responsible Business Alliance's Risk Readiness Assessment, their online platform. And the RRA delineates each of the Copper Mark 32 issue areas that we just saw. And those areas need to be marked if the criteria are met or are at a partially meet status. If there is an issue area that is not met, then the site will not be eligible to carry the mark at all. The platform also requests supporting evidence, as mentioned, as Andrea mentioned, like ISO certificates, and if you're using an approved equivalency framework like the ICMM. Then within 12 months of the initial date of the LOC, a site-specific assurance review must be carried out, which is an independent third-party assessment by a Copper Mark confirmed approved assessor of the site's operational activities and data. And then, as we discussed, the assurance is all encompassing and, addresses human rights, community, governance, labor rights, and the environment. So the resulting comprehensive assurance report is really the foundation of Copper Mark applications. Then, once all documentation, including the final assurance report, once that is all submitted, Copper Mark's independent review team conducts an in-depth analysis of all evidence that has been provided to them by checking for completeness, applicability, accuracy, etc. And the Copper Mark also does perform a desk-based due diligence review of any media reports and databases relating to each site, that is applying for the mark. Then during the review period, just so you know, the Copper Mark may request clarifications or additional supporting evidence, which the applying company, we have managed this through corporate, but work very, very closely with sites. So the applying company and or the assurance providers would then need to submit that additional supporting evidence to Copper Mark, and then once approved, the mark can be awarded to your site. So just a note here, and we'll go into this on another slide, but any gaps, of course, that exist need to be addressed and closed out within 24 months of the date of the LOC. To continue carrying the mark. And then there's a reassessment process with, again, the third-party assurance provider, and that is required every 3 years. Okay, how about moving to the next slide, please? So we thought we would just discuss about how we've gone about it. The approach that Freeport, that we've taken in our journey, has been in phases. We committed to achieving the mark at our copper producing sites and have designed kind of an accelerated approach for doing so. Our commitment to ICMM and implementation of the 38 ICMM performance expectations provided really a solid base from which to begin aligning the Copper Mark 32 issue areas. And so since it's structured that companies can utilize assurance reviews on an equivalency basis, we apply a review of the PEs, including the 3 additional topic areas of the Copper Mark that are not included in the PEs, in the ICMM PEs, around facilitation payments, working hours, and remuneration. When we began the process, we developed an integrated assessment tool aligned with the 38 ICMM PEs and included those 3 additional top-ups for the Copper Mark in the tool. And this tool really allows every site in Freeport's portfolio to self-assess against the PEs and Copper Mark criterion, and to list all evidence the sites have to rate their status. And so this process and integrated assessment tool, or IAT as we call it, really gave us a solid base to look at every site's status, and also gave us the opportunity to review across the company elements for areas of improvement, and also for finding opportunities in our programs, as well as ways in which each site can also share their best practices with other sites. So, really helping to dismantle any potential silos that, were occurring, and really bolster cross-site collaboration. Then together with the assurance provider, we improved the integrated assessment tool to develop a second version that also pulled in external ESG disclosures and evolving requirements across the value chain and across the markets, for Freeport's products. So since our approach has been in phases for the Copper Mark Awards, the phases really align to support our operations and value to our business, as well as being based on the risk profile of each of the sites. So the first LOC was submitted for 6 sites in September of 2020. And then 2 of the sites, of course, being in Arizona, Miami, and Morenci. And then, so all of our phase 1 sites received their awards, between October 2020 and March of last year. And we're currently in the phase 2 process, having submitted a new LOC for 5 sites. And happy to announce, 3 of those sites being in Arizona. And there was a question here in the chat, and 3 of the sites were in Arizona. We are happy to announce that Baghdad in Arizona received its mark last November, and the other 2 sites, Safford and Sierrita, applications are pending, and everything is in process. So again, we'll be moving to phase 3 in the coming months with our Papua, Indonesia operations. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So again, and to note here, all 32 Copper Mark criterion must be third-party verified to be at a meets or partially meets status. So those are assessed as partially meets. They're required to be fully meets within 24 months of submitting the LOC. There is an exception to one, which is Copper Mark criterion number 19, associated with tailings, where the global industry standard on tailings management, or GISTM, will be followed. So Copper Mark, just so you know, Copper Mark does have a publication available on their website addressing the GISTM for implementation by August of 2023. Also, we meet with the Copper Mark team every quarter to provide status updates on what each site is doing in the process, and to move from any partially meets to meet status. And this also includes, you know, a rollout and letting the Copper Mark know the rollout of corporate programs that reach multiple sites. And then, you know, the full site-specific assurance review, as mentioned earlier, or reassessment, is required every 3 years to be able to continue carrying the mark. Okay, next slide, please. So let's see, this slide shows, oh, yeah, a Copper Mark label on cathode from our operations in Chile. So, you know, once you receive the mark, once a site receives the mark, the logo can be placed on, you know, receipts, sales documentation, and other communications materials for that site, very site specific. So on this slide, we thought it would be helpful to share some of the lessons we've learned as we've been going through this process before our Q&A. So as everyone around the globe has experienced, COVID has created challenges, in this case, specific to assurance of the Copper Mark process. But it has also created opportunities in supporting our efforts in making our assurance approach more efficient. So since the third-party reviewers were not able to be on site for assurance for phase 1, we developed a system of document sharing and held many pre-meeting sessions with the assurance providers before the actual kickoff of the assurance review. So we've been fortunate that the current providers have a long history of working with the company, and they've been able, you know, and they've been on, you know, at site for reviews multiple times, you know, in person prior to COVID. So their historical knowledge and institutional knowledge of the sites was already solid. But through this process, this pre-work that we completed before the actual site assurance reviews, really, you know, they helped tremendously, and we'll continue that pre-work approach even as our assurers are physically back on site, you know, and they've started in recent months. And then also as the ESG landscape and requirements mature, there's an increasing rigor in Copper Mark assurance requirements as well. So as the companies go through the process, we'd like to point out the importance of keeping in tune with evolving industry requirements. So that increasing rigor really required a more robust process, both at the corporate and the site levels, and at the same time has led to increasing the value that we get from assurance reviews in improving our programs and processes, both at the corporate level and across all sites. Another is, again, you know, closing the gaps from partially meets to meets. Really a sustained implementation of program improvements is required to be able to move the marker. So typically it requires at least 6 to 12 months of program implementation to be able to demonstrate that a specific criterion for the Copper Mark can be rated as meets if it needs to move from partially meets to meets. And the criteria should be confirmed by the third-party assurer, and evidence, of course, needs to be demonstrated. And then this integrated process that we've developed and improved upon has really helped us both at the corporate and site levels to having a better understanding of the benefits of assurance, and at the same time really provides each site more value in the assurance process, what they receive from the assurance process, and all, and all related reports to continuously improve and find more opportunities, both at the site level and the corporate level in our sustainability and risk management programs. And it's also truly fostered new ideas and improved approaches to not only closing gaps in our systems, but has also bolstered sharing of best practices across these sites and with the corporate teams across disciplines, in all disciplines. So with that, should we open it up for a Q&A, or Andrea, would you like to add anything here?
Oh, this is great. We'd be happy to go into Q&A now. I think there's a few questions we haven't answered yet, and then maybe a new one.
Okay, I'll have a look.
Actually, Donna's going to manage that for us, I think, and then we'll. Yeah.
I'll help out, hop in
Thank you,
between
Donna.
the different screens. I want to thank you both so much, Andrea and Andrea. This is great. So to start with, the first one you pretty much answered, Arizona. Right now, you've got Sarita, Safford, Miami, Baghdad, and Morenci all certified?
Sarita and Safford are underway. But Baghdad, Morenci, Miami, yes, completed.
That is
Very exciting.
fantastic to hear that. What do you think is the main benefit of being a part of Coppermark compared to those mines that are not?
Interestingly, this almost ties to the next question as well, which is the Ford question. So will Ford or other OEMs, original equipment manufacturers of vehicles, require it? We actually, Ford has sent a letter out to all of its copper suppliers, asking them to cascade down to the producers that supply them a requirement to start the process of mapping their supply chains, understanding where their copper comes from, and encouraging them to either to basically seek the copper mark or another similar standard. So although it's not necessarily a binary yes/no requirement yet, they've signaled this intention. And then we also see other automobile and electronics manufacturers doing something similar. So they may not require specifically copper mark, but they require some kind of ESG or sustainability certification. So from the customer perspective, it's kind of becoming very clear to us. I think there's clear value there for us. And really, what does that lead to? It leads to potentially longer contracts. It could, it might lead to premiums, but ultimately it can really deepen the relationship that you have with your customers, and then hopefully lead to stronger contracts, which is really important in our industry. And then shareholders, our shareholders, they really demand that we have a third-party process for certifying our sites. We're getting asked more and more by more and more shareholders for this. And so the copper mark really helps us deliver on that for our shareholders. So, for us and our stakeholders, from those two perspectives, it's extremely important. But then also just the rigor that it's now put around engagement with stakeholders, the fact that, free, prior, and informed consent and the values and cultural heritage and Indigenous peoples requirements within the standards, we think are something that really add value to an operation, being able to not only demonstrate what you're already doing, but as Andrea was just saying, make it better over time. So hopefully that helps.
It does. And it does. It cascades investors, consumers, everything. Do you know how many other miners have embarked on this process, and how many mines globally have been awarded the copper mark?
Yeah, I actually don't have the statistics today, but if you go to coppermark.org, they have a list. So I will say that of the producers that are outside of China, I would say a huge number. So Rio Tinto was actually the first to get certified, or to be awarded, I should say. I think there's letters of commitment now from many other producers. So Anglo, BHP actually just certified its 3 operations. Arubis, which is a big smelting and refining company in Europe, KGHM, of course, KGHM operates here as well, and Tech, I believe, as well, and several others. So I would say a majority of sort of the leaders in the copper industry are coming on board. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I'm really interested on this one. Can you give us an example of a gap that was found and how it was addressed to go from almost meats to meats?
Yeah, that's a great question, to go from partially meats to meats. There were a good one would be the mitigation hierarchy. So no net loss for biodiversity. That was something that, work around the best practice standard and ICMM's requirements were just finalized in the last few years. And so we hadn't fully implemented it yet. And so really going through the process of training our sites and integrating it into our projects process for, new projects. So that would be a great example. Another one would be responsible sourcing of minerals. So for the London Metals Exchange, we're required to go through a process of vetting the concentrates we buy externally to put into our smelters. And there's a series of due diligence requirements behind that were also, basically a new standard was developed in order to implement that. So, we went through that process of implementing it and are just in the process now of being able to close those gaps out.
What about unions? Or does this have any impact on unions and whether they're happy with it? Or have you had any concerns with this? I would think that it would be beneficial.
Yeah, sure. There are requirements within the Copper Mark for collective bargaining, freedom of association, human rights, ILO standards. And so those requirements ultimately are put forth through the Copper Mark. They also are through the ICMM performance expectations. And so, those are sort of the basic tenets and requirements. And Copper Mark, of course, has this engagement process where they have, a multi-stakeholder process for governance and send out their standards for comment. So we haven't in particular necessarily had any engagement directly, on how a union might feel or not feel about the Copper Mark's requirements. But I would say that, it, like I said, it requires freedom of association, collective bargaining, et cetera. All those systems get tested by the assurer.
And then are you able to say how this certification compares to sustainability standards from ISO?
So you'd have to pick one of those for me to give you a real specific answer. However, what I would say is that I was mentioning before how there's an equivalency framework. So if you have, for example, your ISO 14001 certification, or you have energy management, which I can't remember what number that one is, 50,000, I think. And then, or OC health and safety, those can all be used for equivalency and evidence in the 32 criteria. So it's pretty cool. If you go to the Copper Mark website, they have an equivalency matrix where you can actually go and look at the ISO standards and how they compare, and then where they enable them to be used for equivalency, so you don't duplicate effort.
Like that. And then for this one, do you think it's going to be harder for smaller mines to compete without the mark, or do you think that this is a scalable way that even the smaller mines can meet these standards, even if they're not one of the real large producers?
Yeah, actually, Copper Mark has a program for that. They actually have a differentiated fee for small mines to encourage them to participate, and they will actually work hard with small mines or medium-sized mines to help them implement. And so they've tried to be very intentional about that. And I think actually there's a letter of commitment for a small to medium-sized mine in Peru that's currently going through the process right now.
Great. And then I think we got one last one here between the chat and the question and answers. What do you foresee is going to be the biggest challenge in meeting future increasing rigor with this program?
Yeah, I think, as with anything, there is a learning curve that you go through, and how you design your systems for basically checking your status, let's say, within a system, and then for engaging external stakeholders in that process. I think, you know, it's not easy. I would say there's nothing easy about the process. Ultimately, the engagement of stakeholders in the assurance process that is now there to get to reasonable assurance is a challenge. It's not something, you know, that is a normal everyday thing for stakeholders to be engaged by a third party assurer. So there's like a bit of a learning curve there, not only for the company themselves, but also for the stakeholder. Like, do I trust this person? I'm talking to this person I've never met before. Normally I just talk to the operation or the community manager, you know. And so that's been a learning curve, but I think that it's really beneficial, actually. You know, we ultimately have just strengthened some relationships, learned new things through that process. So I think so there's that. And then I would also say that, you know, Andrea mentioned this too, right? The requirements for ESG are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more. And so how companies, you know, interpret them for their, you know, from a risk management perspective, how you implement them, and then how you have an assure them or audit them, if it gets to that point, you know, it takes a lot of thought and a huge commitment from the sites. I mean, Andrea and I are just here to facilitate, right? Like, this is really work that's done by our sites, and we're just here to facilitate and advise and develop tools to enable. So I would say keeping up with the requirements, and then, you know, this sort of more integrated approach to the assurance that's developing over time.
Thank you so much, ladies, for your presentation today. I'm going to turn it over to Julia Potter now.
Thanks, Donna, for doing that. Wonderful.
Thank you, ladies, so much. That was amazing. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate having you both here and for your continued support of WIM Arizona. Donna, I think you can go, or sorry, Megan, to the next slide. Oh, looks like we got some text not fitting in the text box, but so we just wanted to use this opportunity to invite any members that are in attendance. If you're interested in joining one of our 8 subcommittees or getting involved in our leadership, we're actively looking for committee members, and we're in the process of nominating officers for our 2022 fiscal year, which starts April 1st. We are entirely run by members who volunteer their time to help advance our objectives. And just getting involved with the leadership is a great way to give back, use and grow your skills, meet your fellow WIM Arizona members and our stakeholders. And so if you're interested in getting involved, there's some contact information down there. I think Donna also is sending it in the chat. You can reach out to us on social or at our email address, arizonachapter@womeninmining.us. We have our annual planning meeting coming up on February 6th, which is where we'll really be kind of figuring out which members want to be part of what committee. And so just let us know if you're interested in joining us, and we'd love to have you. And then I think we've got on the next slide, just some information about upcoming events. As I mentioned, our annual planning meeting, which is we kind of use to set goals and figure out who's doing what. So if you're not able to make that, that's totally fine. Reach out, let us know what committee you might be interested in joining. And then of course we have our February dig-in, which is about water rights. We're having another speaker from Freeport-McMoRan for that one. And then our next in-person event will be our Q1 event at the end of March. And we are very much looking forward to hosting that at Hexagon's offices in downtown Tucson. And then we've got another dig-in plan for March 30th. We'll be releasing some more details about that soon. Thank you all so much for being here, and hope to see you at a future WIM event shortly.